Today we are starting session 2 of our new volume, and this week's message is called God's Miraculous Passover out of Exodus 12. This is one of my favorite stories in the book of Exodus. Exodus 12, God's Miraculous Passover. Let's all stand, let's all rise. It is 3 slides. If you are like me and you are in denial of needing glasses, you might need to turn to the back TV to read the slides, okay? But it is 3 slides, and we're going to read all 3 of them together, okay? Can you all see that from where you are? You guys have good eyes. Okay, all right. All right, we're going to read these 3 slides together. Ready? Begin. On that night, I will pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn son and firstborn male animal in the land of Egypt. I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt, for I am the Lord. But the blood on your doorposts will serve as a sign, marking the houses where you are staying. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. This plague of death will not touch you. Okay, ready? Begin. Then Moses called all the elders of Israel together and said to them, "Go pick out a lamb or young goat for each of your families and slaughter the Passover animal. Drain the blood into a basin. Then take a bundle of hyssop branches and dip it into the blood. Brush the hyssop across the top and sides of the doorframes of your houses. For the Lord will pass through the land to strike down the Egyptians. But when he sees the blood on the top and sides of the doorframe, the Lord will pass over your home." Okay, ready? Begin. Remember, these instructions are a permanent law. When you enter the land the Lord has promised to give you, you will continue to observe this ceremony. Then your children will ask, "What does this ceremony mean?" And you will reply, "It is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, for he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt." When Moses had finished speaking, all the people bowed down to the ground and worshipped. So the people of Israel did just as the Lord had commanded through Moses and Aaron. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Okay. This is an important life skill. Okay? You will know you have reached adulthood because you can do this one very important task. Okay? I'm sure you're all wondering what it is. Is it taxes? What is it? Okay. In my humble opinion, these are one of the things that marks you as growing up. You are growing up, okay? You have become a grown-up. It is this: how to cook the perfect hard-boiled egg, okay? That is one of the rite of passages to adulthood, because that is actually harder than it looks. Okay, who knows how to cook the perfect hard-boiled egg? Not gray on the yolk part, because that means you overcooked it. Not too runny, because then you can't eat it. But perfectly in the middle. Who knows how? Okay? Do you really know how? Do you guys know how? Oh, okay. We got some of you who know, but not the full thing, okay? Here's how to make, trick question, how to make the perfect hard-boiled egg in Colorado, okay? Because the altitude does change everything, okay? Here's how you cook the perfect egg. First, okay, you figure out how many eggs you're going to cook. This is important because you got to get the right size pot, okay? You get the right size pot where all the eggs are kind of close together, but they're not crowding each other out. You put a little water at the bottom first, because if you drop the egg too hard into an empty pan, it will crack, okay? So put a little bit of water, you put the eggs in, okay? And then you put a little bit of vinegar, because what that will do is that will stop any cracks from cracking further, okay? These are pro tips, you guys. All right. Then you have to put a hard boil with the lid off, okay? Bring the pot to a hard rolling boil. Who knows what a rolling boil is? Okay, rolling boil, okay? Lots of bubbles. Then what do? This is key. Do you guys know? No. You can't put it, it's too early to do that. You turn off the heat, you cover the lid, and you leave it for 10 minutes. Well, it depends on the time, how many eggs you have, okay? But you leave it on that stove, put the heat off for 10 minutes, okay? Then you take it off, you put it in ice water, And then you have to peel it off within the ice water, okay? And that's how you get perfectly boiled eggs. I promise there is a reason why I'm sharing this, okay? Hold that analogy, because in rolling, boiling water, an egg that is previously liquid turns into what? A solid. It gets hard, okay? Now, last week, we started our new volume on law and life. That as God has now, his people have grown, he is going to bring them law and life in the new land. And so, if in the book of Genesis, creation is one of the most foundational stories, it's one of the most foundational and most important parts of our faith, in the book of Exodus, this is one of the most important foundational aspects of our faith, is the Passover and the Exodus and freedom for God's people from slavery through the blood that was shed and put along the door. Now, there are so many parallels, so many connections, so many moments of foreshadowing that this particular moment with the Exodus just about to happen, God's people finally hearing God break through, this moment has so many connections to Jesus. You and I cannot fully understand Jesus and New Testament unless you start to understand it here in the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus, with this moment in Passover. So last week, we saw that God miraculously saved Moses, right? He should have died, yet he did not. He grew up in Pharaoh's home, and then he was miraculously called by God in a burning bush to be the mouthpiece of God to deliver God's people from 400 plus years of slavery in Egypt. And although Moses was very reluctant to go, he did not want to go, right? Yet he goes with his brother and steps before Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go." Now, Pharaoh refuses. Pharaoh refuses. He literally laughs at Moses and says, "Who are you, first of all, to come before me? And who is this God of the Israelites that I should let his enslaved people go?" Because here's Pharaoh thinking, if your God is all that powerful, why would he have let you go into slavery in the first place? Okay? It's a legitimate question. He's probably thinking, if your God is so powerful, why has he not stepped in until now? If your God is also powerful, so again, he's questioning. Because remember, in Egyptian culture, Pharaoh was basically what? Like he was God embodied, right? Among the many gods that they served. And so here is Pharaoh in the highest kingdom at that time, and the highest position, like culturally, but also like religiously in their religion, he was like the highest person, okay? He's like, who are you to ask your enslaved people, your enslaved God, to let you go? That's a joke. And so Pharaoh says, no. In fact, I'll make it worse for you. So God warns Pharaoh through Moses. He says, if you do not let my people go, then I will show up and answer the question. You're going to ask me who I am? I will answer. And so here comes the first judgment. But every single time God releases a plague, he always tells Pharaoh what will happen first. If you let my people go, it will all be good. But if you do not let my people go, then I will release this judgment for two purposes. Now, most of us, when we hear about this kind of story, there were how many plagues total? 10, okay? First, the water Nile, which is really important to them, right? Into blood. Second, an infestation of frogs. Would that gross you out? Think about getting into your bed and there being frogs in your bed. Think about going to the toilet and then frogs jumping into your butt. Okay, think about like eating and frogs jumping out of your bowl. Like that's how many frogs there were, okay? That's already gross enough. But that's number 2. Okay, but still Pharaoh would not listen. So then, how many of you, okay, like you go to your house and you like shake the curtain or you shake your blanket and you see all the dust just floating in the air, okay? All the dust in Egypt became gnats or lice. That's what they say. Can you imagine? Okay, you don't have to raise your hand, but have you guys ever had lice in your schools growing up? Dude, so gross, okay? Okay, imagine that everywhere, all around you, okay? Still, Pharaoh would not listen. So then flies swarmed Egypt. And then the livestock was targeted, which was their economy. It's kind of like if the stock market totally crashed. Everything crashed all at once. That's what it would have been like to us, to them at that time. Sixth, boils that infect, like who's ever had like a really bad, hopefully not, a sore or a boil or something. Like it was infected and gross. Like they could not heal them. Seventh was hail and thunder and lightning. Eighth were locusts. And ninth was darkness. Because remember, one of their most important gods was the sun god, Ra, right? So God is like, are you still asking who I am? You don't believe that I am God? Okay, then I will do this if you do not let my people go. So complicit in that, the opposite is this. If you let my people go, you will not experience this judgment. But if you do not let my people go, you're the one who asked the question, who is this God? I will show up. And I will show you that your Egyptian God is nothing compared to me because I am the one true God. I am the one who literally formed the sun and put it in the sky. You're going to tell me you're going to worship that instead? Then I'll show you darkness. Who's ever been in like pitch black dark? Like you can't see your hand in front of your face kind of dark. Like that is a scary kind of darkness, okay? And that's what happened. Now, a lot of people read this and they're like, you know what? How can I follow a God that does stuff like that? How can I follow a God who has such crazy judgment and such vengeance? But that, in and of itself, if you think about it, is a judgment call. That's me and you being like, how can God do that? He's not good. So does that make you and I the judge of what is right and good? That actually makes you and I God. That we can make the shots, like we can call the shots. That I think because that person is wrong, that God is wrong. Like God does that, then I can't follow that God. But the reality is that only someone who is truly all-powerful, truly all-knowing, truly can do anything, and yet in his wisdom, in his kindness, in his mercy, in his grace, in his righteousness, acts accordingly. Only someone who is like that can make that kind of judgment call. And that is not you and I. Each and every one of these plagues, we see two very important things. If you don't remember anything from today, this is the one thing I want you to take away, okay? In this story especially, but all throughout Scripture, we see these twin characteristics of God. These always go together. Who has a coin? No one has a coin. Okay? Oh, you have a coin. Good job, Jalen. On the coin, what do we have on one side? Heads and tails. Can you have a coin with a head and no tail? No, because then it's a counterfeit. Okay? Can you have a coin with a tail but no head? No, it's a counterfeit. Okay? A coin must have a head and a tail, right? In the same way, God is both just and God is merciful. He is always both at the same time. We cannot fully understand how God is always doing that. But here's the thing. First of all, one of the most important characteristics is that God is just. God is just. He did not judge Egypt without warning Egypt. He is not this like crazy psychopath judge who's like, I'm mad, I'm going to just wipe you all out. That is not how God works. God does not release judgment without reason. He does not release judgment without a temperedness to him. God does not just act on a whim because he's angry. God always, every single time through Moses, warned Pharaoh and his court and his officials every single time. Every single time. And then when Pharaoh refused to listen, God did exactly what he said he would do. When I was a young parent, I'm still a young parent. But when I was a younger parent, my son was 2, okay? And I had these older auntie there that I was like in the community with, and they had kids older than me, a little bit older than me. And I remember one time, most parents commonly say this, but say you're somewhere at the grocery store or something, and your kid is throwing a tantrum, okay? And what do most parents say? If you don't stop, we're gonna leave, okay? Or like if we're someplace, and we're like, if you don't stop, we're gonna leave. But are you really gonna leave? If you don't actually follow through, say that kid tantrums again, then what do you have to do? You have to leave. But most parents don't do that. So the thing is, you cannot say you will do something and not do it. Because what does that teach your kid? That they don't have to listen to you. Because you won't do what you say. But if every single time within reason, right, you give a reasonable cause. If I don't want to leave this party, this like whatever thing, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say, if you don't tantrum, then I will do this. But I will not say I'm not going to leave. We're going to leave because I don't want to leave. So I have to give realistic things so that when my kid hears me say XYZ, he knows XYZ will happen. Does it make sense? So God in his justice says, if you let my people go, I will be good. But if you do not let my people go, the next plague will be this. And what if God didn't do it? Then he would not be just. He would not be just. God did exactly what he said he would do. And because God is just, he cannot overlook sin. He cannot ignore sin. He cannot just turn a blind eye. Now, we talked about this. Every single one of these plagues he released was specifically targeting one of the important Egyptian gods. He was both rightly judging Pharaoh's sin, and he was rightly showing his power over Egypt. God was showing both Egypt and Israel who the living God was. Because Israel has spent the last 400 years surrounded in Egyptian culture, surrounded by Egyptian gods, surrounded by Egypt. 400 years is a long time. Most of us, the generation above us, is the one who came to the States, right? They carry a lot of the culture with them. But think about 400 years from now. Will your future kids carry the same kind of heritage like knowledge? Probably not. 400 years is a long time. So God was not just showing Egypt his power, but he was showing his own people his power. He was like, look, I know you're a bunch of slaves, and it's the underdog. Who loves to root for the underdog? Okay? Israel is the major underdog in the story. And God is like, you know what? I'm going to show you too what kind of God I am. I am the one true living God. And I'm going to show you my people too. And I will show you what happens when you trust in me. So God is just. That is the head of the coin. What's the tail? What's the other half of the coin? God is full of grace and mercy. He does not execute judgment without first extending grace and mercy. Just like if my kids do something that they know they shouldn't be doing, I don't just discipline right away, but I give them a warning. I remind them, this is what it is. You know better now. And if you choose to cross that boundary again, I have no choice but to step in. But I'm always extending first grace and mercy. Every time, he says, Pharaoh, will you turn? Will you listen? Pharaoh says no. He releases judgment. Then Pharaoh, every time, it's like, Moses, come back. Tell your God to stop. Pray. I believe now. Moses prays and God relents, knowing that Pharaoh would harden his heart again and say no again. And still, God relents. Every time we see God's judgment, we also have to see God's grace and mercy. And every time you see God's grace and mercy, you better believe, wait, if God's showing me lots of grace and mercy, maybe it's because I need to repent and go back to God, because he's giving me grace before the judgment comes. And here's our main point today. God will execute judgment, but he will give grace to those who follow him. They always come together. He does not execute judgment justly as a righteous God without also giving grace upon grace upon grace. Today's passage is covering the 10th and final plague, the biggest one. You'll notice that as these plagues go on, they get more and more severe. And this is the most severe one. And with this one, Pharaoh will finally relent. So God is speaking now in this passage that we have, Exodus 12:12. God is speaking through Moses now to the Israelites. So he's told Pharaoh everything. Pharaoh has said, no, I'm not going to let him go. And so God is preparing his own people to experience his grace. And so here he is in the next passage. If we go, it says here, God is speaking through Moses to his people now. He's saying, on that night, I will pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn son. Now, why firstborn son? There's actually a lot to this. I can't go into all of it today. But one thing I want you to remember is who did Pharaoh target during Moses' time when he was a baby to try to squash the Israelites? He was targeting all of the sons of Israel, throw them into the Nile. Because if we get all the sons, the family lines cannot continue. And so here's God saying, I will execute judgment, justice, not just vengeance or anger, but I will execute judgment on the gods of Egypt, for I am the Lord. I am the Lord. Again here, this is God literally answering Pharaoh's question. So be careful what questions you ask, because Pharaoh was like, who is this God? And God's like, okay, I hear you. I will show you what kind of God I am, and I will show you that I am God over all the other gods that you follow. Now, every other plague after the first three, God protected the Israelites from experiencing plagues 4 through 9. But this 10th plague, they had to do something to experience God's grace. They had to do something physically. And so God tells them specifically, when you put the blood of the lamb on your doorpost being like top, side, side. When you put that blood on there, it will serve as a sign. That word sign in Hebrew is the idea of a distinguishing mark, something unique, okay? Or a miraculous sign. That sign was blood. That sign was blood. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. The plague of death will not touch your house. So either, here's the thing, the consequence, the wages of sin is always death. When there is sin, the result is death. Just like if you go and choose to kill someone, there are consequences to that kind of behavior, right? The consequence of sin is always death. But here's the thing, either the sinner dies or a substitute dies in the sinner's place. But blood is always the sign, because blood signifies life and death. So here in verse 21, Moses calls everyone together and says, go and do what God says. Pick out a lamb. Did the lamb do anything? The lamb is a substitute. And slaughter that Passover animal. Now, for them, this is not just going to a petting zoo and finding a cute little goat. That's not what this is. This is literally their livestock. It's almost like the idea of your pet. That's kind of the concept, okay? So they didn't obviously domesticate sheep into their homes, but they were shepherds, these people. Israelites were shepherds. And so for them, killing one of their flock was like killing one of their own family. The equivalent concept, which sounds really, really brutal, but the equivalent concept is like if you have a pet you love that you have cared for, okay? A lot of us have pets. It's like killing that pet. That's how severe this sounds, okay? And so it's saying, slaughter that animal, drain the blood, take the branch, and brush it along the sides. For the Lord will pass through this land, but when he sees the blood, he will pass over your home. Where does this sound familiar? that an innocent one takes your place, sheds his blood on a wooden frame so that you and I do not have to pay the price, but instead death passes over us because we are under the blood of Jesus. Where else does that sound familiar? Do you see the parallel over and over and over and over again? That God is saying, remember in Genesis, we saw the very first time when they were naked, fig leaves, those things dry up. Those aren't clothes. What did God do? God killed the animal, skinned it to cover. Over and over again, we see the pattern that God is showing us. This is not like God does not like animals. No, that's not what this is. Because God is literally the one who created all the animals, okay? But this is God showing us over and over again. One, this is the cost of sin. In our society especially, I think we have strayed a lot from how grave it is that we go our own way. And in so doing, we do not follow and acknowledge God. And in so doing, we are sinners. And we do not understand the gravity of that kind of sin like the Israelites did. You and I, the only thing you deserve in this life is death. It's the only thing we deserve. And yet, he does not end the story there. He says, yes, there will be judgment, because if I do not judge, I am not a just God. There will be judgment, but I do not want my people to experience judgment. And so here is the way. Here is the way, and this is the way. That when you trust and believe me, because remember, these people had to do something. They had to slaughter the animal. They had to drain the blood. They had to put it on the doors. They had to believe that that was enough. You and I have that choice to believe or not. In verse 24, he calls them to remember. Do not forget what God did. And here's the reason why, for two reasons. First of all, God knows that we are very prone to forget. Very prone to forget. He wants them to remember. Think about every single Passover after this, the parents in that home look at that son. Think about the oldest son in your family, okay? The oldest son in your family is the one that would have died, okay? Think about every Passover after this when you look at your firstborn son growing 1 year older, 1 year older, 1 year older, and you remember that God passed over your family and he saved your family. This Passover points back to the past, but it also points to the future. One day, another lamb would come to be the ultimate and final sacrifice, who would one day shed his blood on a wooden frame so that you and I, death would pass over us. For those of us who've grown up in church, we probably heard this a million times. But I want to challenge you as we close out this year and start the new one. Do we remember? Do we understand the gravity of what Jesus has done? It was me that should have died. It was you and I that should pay the price for our sin. And yet, Jesus came to be a substitute on this cross so that I do not have to die. For those of you who did not grow up in church, or those of you who are struggling to believe, here's the thing. When God released his power and the plagues and all the things, it was to show both Egypt and Israel that he is God. And when the Israelites left, there was a following of Egyptians who left with them. Because they said, hold on. I don't care what Pharaoh says. Dude, every one of these plagues, this is the real God. There were Egyptians and other foreigners who left with the Israelites too. They crossed through the Red Sea too. Because they believed. They saw and they're like, yo, I got to join in on this because this is the one true living God. When we witness his judgment, it is not an opportunity. I mean, it can be, but it's not a chance for us to say, I don't believe in this God. But rather, it's a chance for us to be like, whoa, this is the one true living God. And so I actually want to know and follow him instead. Who knows how to make mashed potatoes? Okay, remember my hard-boiled egg analogy? Okay, I saw this lady on Instagram this holiday season. She is so smart. Here's what she did. You know what the hardest part about mashed potatoes? All the peeling, all the chopping, all the boiling. It's a lot of work, okay? It's so easy, but it's a lot of work. What she did was she cut the potatoes in half, boiled them. She got a cooling rack, okay? And then she smashed like the skin side up so that all the stuff on the inside just comes out. I was like, that lady's brilliant, okay? And then you just mash it up. In the same boiling water, the egg becomes hard. But in the same boiling water, that potato becomes soft. When we see and experience God's judgment, God moving in ways that we cannot understand, when we experience boiling water in our lives, you and I have the chance to either harden ourselves against God or be soft before God and say, you know what? Through this boiling water, I will choose to say, yes, I will choose to believe. And in so doing, he will change me. Because you know what does not taste good? Raw potatoes. But you know what tastes really good? Mashed potatoes, okay? So every one of you, we have that opportunity. This year, who knows what will come? Who knows what will come in 2025? But will there be boiling water in some of our lives? Yes, there probably will be. And so, will I choose to believe? Or will I choose to harden my heart? Can I have the praise to come up? And all of us stand. The choice is yours. The choice is mine. No matter how many times you've heard this, or it's the very first time you've heard this, will you look at God's display of judgment and power, and will you believe? Will you believe? Because judgment will come no matter what. But for those of us who will say, you know what? I'm going to take this boiling water, I'm going to take this judgment, and I'm going to actually come to know God deeper through it. The only way to be saved is to be found under the blood of Jesus, is to be found in God's presence. And so we're going to sing this song together. Because only in God's presence, only under his wing, only under his blood, that is the safest place to be. Where judgment becomes, rather than judgment, it becomes the place to experience his grace and his mercy.